Welcome, bienvenidas, bienvenidos. We will wait maybe a few minutes, so we wait for more participants. Thank you for joining on time. And maybe just before we start, maybe to remind you that you have 3 languages available. Hay 3 idiomas disponibles para esta reunión. Il y a 3 langues que vous pouvez utiliser pour écouter. Le français, también pueden elegir el castellano, debajo donde pone interpretación. And you can stay in the original language in English, if you want. So this conversation today will take place in English, but we will be offering interpretation into Spanish and French. On vous invite aussi à choisir français, si vous voulez, au-dessous, au menu. Pueden elegir el castellano debajo en la opción de interpretación. So here you have the option of choosing the language. And we will be recording the session, so this will be available after the presentation. So you can also share it and check it in the future if you want. As we wait for maybe 1 minute more, we also invite you to make comments in the questions and answers or in the chat box. You can start introducing questions or comments, and we will bring them at the end of the conversation. So the idea today is that we will have 3 speakers making 3 presentations and some commentaries, and then we will have a space to address questions and discuss with all of you. So maybe we can start. As the start is more like an introduction. Just maybe again, if you have any issue with the translation to the interpretation in French, Spanish or English, you can also put a comment in the chat box. Si tienen algún problema con acceder al canal de interpretación simultánea, pueden poner algún comentario en el chat box. Si vous avez un problème avec la langue, vous pouvez nous faire un commentaire, on peut vous aider au chat. Well, maybe we can start. I will introduce myself. I'm Mariana Walter. I'm an assistant professor at IBE, which is the Institute Barcelona of International Studies. And I'm also a member of the coordination group of the Environmental Justice Atlas. And today with my colleague Marta Conde, that is a researcher at the GEO3 Barcelona of the CSIC, which is a Spanish research institution, we will be coordinating this webinar. But there are many different organizations and persons behind this webinar. Claudia Custodio from the Observatorio del Deuta en la Globalización will be supporting us, sharing resources and addressing technical issues. But she's also the author of an excellent report that I will be mentioning now, and you will have the possibility to read it. So just to say that this webinar is a result of an ongoing conversation between different organizations and networks that are concerned with the moving increase in the consumption and extraction of metals and minerals deemed critical for the energy and digital transition. Sorry, there's a phone, it never rings, and it rings today. But it's not these materials such as rare earths are not only critical for the energy and digital transition, but for many other uses, such as defense and aerospace. So there's many different pressures to access these materials. In the year 2023, and you can see in the following slide, different organizations and networks, we developed the Rare Earth Elements Impacts and Conflicts Map. Maybe we can see, Claudia, do you want to change the slide so we can also show the map? That is a resource, that's a lively resource that you can check. And in this map, exactly, thank you. Here you can see the map we developed. You can look for the title online, and there's different reports that also are attached to this map. We documented more than 25 cases of socio-environmental contention in in more than 18 countries, in China, in Chile, in Brazil, in Greenland, in India, in Kenya, in Madagascar, in Malaysia, in Myanmar, in Norway, but also in Spain and Sweden and many other countries that were taking place across the rare earth supply chains, from the extraction, the processing, the recycling, and waste disposal sites related with rare earth utilities elements. In this collaborative map that is available online, we aim to make visible, Claudia, I think you, the different resources, excellent. We wanted to make visible how the expansion of rare earth demand, consumption, and extraction is fostering environmental, social, and human rights injustices and abuses across global rare earth supply chains, and how local communities are resisting across the world. So this is a compendium of different cases. Some of these we will mention today in Madagascar, in Malaysia, but also in other countries of the world. And there are many more that could be documented, actually. There's a strong pressure to extract these materials right now. So we invite you all to check the map and also the reports that we will be sharing in the chat. Moreover, last year, in 2024, a group of colleagues from the Observatorio del Delta de la Globalización visited Madagascar, where there's currently a strong pressure to develop rare earth extraction projects. And they issued a brilliant report and a documentary that you can check, that we will be also sharing in the chat. But many things have happened since last year. And we will also want to make a comment during this conversation today about the increasing violence and criminalization against local communities that is taking place as we speak in Madagascar. So before introducing the experts that will be talking with a lot of knowledge from the ground about how these materials are extracted and the socio-environmental challenges that take place in those sites of extraction and processing, I want to just very briefly explain what rare earth elements are and why there is so much fuss about them lately. There has been mentioned in many, in the press a lot, and they are bringing strong attention. So rare earths, they are usually referred to different types of materials, but today specifically we rare earths, will be talking about them, about this group of 17 chemical elements that are mostly located at the bottom of the periodic table, that are considered critical, strategic in many cases, for the digital and energy transition. These past decades, China has dominated global rare earth extraction and processing activities, and the other industrialized economies, such as the US or the EU, are currently racing to secure their control, the control and access of the full supply chain. These days, there has been news of these strategic projects in Europe that aim to ensure the control of the extraction, processing, and also recycling of different critical materials, including rare earth in Europe and abroad. So what happens with rare earth? They have this group of materials, have unique magnetical and optical and electronic properties that make them crucial and very difficult to substitute in many appliances like wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles, screens, catalysts, steel alloys, many different appliances. However, they are not only critical for the energy transition technologies such as wind, solar, or electric batteries, but also for defense and aerospace engineering to produce aircraft, missiles, satellites, and communication systems. Actually, between 2017 and 2020, the extraction of these materials has increased more than 85%. So as to give you a context of the current pressures to expand the extraction and processing of these materials. So without further delaying the presentations that we want to hear today, I will let my colleague Marta Conde to present the fabulous speakers that we will be hearing now. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the presentations, and please make your comments and the questions in the chat and in the Q&A section, so we can then expand, I think, a debate, which is the idea today. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Mariana. So today with us, we have the pleasure of speaking with Stephen Emerman, Lee Tan, and Bruno Chareyron, who will guide us through the examination of the socio-environmental challenges that the extraction and processing of rare earths poses. We're first going to start with Stephen Emerman. So I'm going to introduce each one of them before they speak. So Stephen Emerman is an expert in hydrology and geophysics from Princeton University, also has a PhD in geophysics from Cornell University, and has been teaching these subjects for 31 years, including as a Fulbright professor in Ecuador and Nepal, has 70 peer-reviewed publications in these areas. And since 2018, he's been the owner of Malak Consulting, which specializes in evaluating the environmental impacts of mining for mining companies, as well as governmental and non-governmental organizations. He has evaluated proposed and existing tailings storage facilities in North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, so all over the world, Oceania too, and has testified on tailings storage facilities in numerous spaces like the U.S. House of Representatives, the United Nations Assembly, the Permanent Commission for Human Rights, this in Climate and Legacy Committee. There's numerous, his CV is long, and he's also one of the authors of Safety First Guidelines for Responsible Mine Tailings Management. So it's a pleasure to have you, Stephen, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Share the screen, and here's PowerPoint. Can you see this okay?
Yes.
Everything looks fine? Great. Okay. So thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to be speaking on problems of rare earth element mining. This will be just 10 minutes, so quite a whirlwind tour. We'll start off with this opening photo. This is a woman collecting drinking water, Madagascar, southeast coast of Madagascar, from a lake, and this lake is contaminated by rare earth element mining. This is the only source of drinking water for this community, is this surface water bodies, rivers and lakes, and I'll be coming to that in the end. Okay, so we'll skip the introduction. There's me testifying for the U.S. Congress. Okay, so I'm going to put rare earth element mining into 4 categories: hard rock mining, remining of mine waste, in situ leaching, and finally heavy mineral sands extraction, and that will bring us to Madagascar. So I'll say just a few things about each of these types of mining and their problems. So if we start off with hard rock mining, hard rock mining for rare earth elements is not much different in terms of the environmental impacts, not much different than hard rock mining for many other commodities, with the exception of often the added risks of radioactivity in rare earth element mining. And that can have impacts on mine workers, and also the tailings can be radioactive. And I will let Bruno discuss that further, okay? So there's many environmental impacts of hard rock mining, but what I usually regard as the 2 most important is the risk of catastrophic failure of the mine waste storage facility and the risk of acid mine drainage. So I'll say a bit about each of these, okay? So to start off with mine waste facilities, unfortunately, this is becoming very, very familiar. On the left, Mount Poly Mine, British Columbia, Canada, 2014, 24 million cubic meters of tailings were released with destruction of salmon habitat. In the middle, Samarco Mine, Minas Gerais, Brazil, 2015, release of 32 million cubic meters of tailings, 19 deaths. The tailings flowed 637 kilometers to reach the Atlantic Ocean. finally on the right, Copogu do Feijão mine in Minas Gerais, Brazil, January 25th, 2019. Release of nearly 10 million cubic meters of tailings and 272 deaths, including 258 mine workers. Okay, so this is, I would say this is the most important impact of hard rock mining, this possibility, this risk. But second, I want to draw your attention to acid mine drainage, and then this is also going to be important for Madagascar. I took these photos. This is on the left. This is water coming out of the dam drainage pipes from the Morro do Ouro mine in Paracatu, Minas Gerais, Brazil. And we see that characteristic red-brown color of acid mine drainage. And note that this is a picture of the water after it's been treated. Okay. Now on the right, we go downstream, a village called Santa Rita. They get their water from groundwater, and we see the identical color in the water. So essentially the downstream community is drinking acid mine drainage. Okay, I want to do a quick tutorial as to what this is all about, because this will be important for Madagascar. Okay, so the general reaction is that we have pyrite or iron sulfide reacting with oxygen and water to give us dissolved iron and sulfuric acid. Okay, so the idea is that a sulfide ore contains sulfide minerals. Okay, chalcopyrite, copper sulfide, galena, lead sulfide, sphalerite, zinc sulfide, etc. And these sulfide minerals are typically stable when they're beneath the surface. But when they're excavated, they're brought to the surface, they're crushed, they're exposed to oxygen. That oxidation will convert the sulfide minerals into sulfuric acid. That also releases the heavy metals that were part of the crystal structure. The increased acidity in streams also causes release of heavy metals that were attached to stream sediments. This acid mine drainage can have impacts on public water supply and aquatic life. Okay, now the important thing to keep in mind is that this acid mine drainage is really universal whenever you have ore bodies that contain sulfide minerals. Okay, now what I mean by this is that there's no examples of sulfide ore mines that have been operated and closed without environmental pollution. On the left, that's a report by me, okay? And what I did is I took all of the candidates for sulfide ore mines that have been operated and closed without environmental pollution, and I found that actually all of them have extensive records of environmental pollution. And it's important to keep in mind that all of these candidates where someone has said that there's been no environmental pollution, they've all been in relatively arid environments. So you have to keep in mind if someone says they're going to open a mine where there's a sulfide ore body and there's going to be no environmental pollution, it's going to be the first time that's ever happened. And if it's going to be in a very wet climate, you have to think about how likely that is that the very first sulfide ore mine without environmental pollution would be in a very wet climate. Okay, now we're now going to go on to remining. And this always sounds good very superficially. Instead of creating more mine waste, let's just take the mine waste we already have, sitting in big piles all over the world, and let's remine it for rare earth elements. It always sounds good from a superficial standpoint. It always sounds good to the press, okay? The important point is that when you remine waste, you don't make the waste go away, okay? You're extracting a very, very tiny fraction of the waste for rare earth minerals. And then you still have the rest of the waste left, okay? Essentially, what remining does is it recreates the same mine waste. Okay, and here's an example from the US, Leadville, Colorado. There's a proposal for a remining operation. In this area, this was a Superfund site. There were many, many mine waste piles, great issues of environmental pollution. It was about a 3-decade effort to finally stabilize this mine waste, both physically and chemically. And now there's a proposal to basically reopen this mine waste, reprocess it, and then store it again in a tailings deposit along the headwaters of the Arkansas River. Okay, so we have issues there where we want to reopen mine waste that has already been stabilized. Just an example of the problem we see on the lower right. These are experiments commissioned by the mining company, and they show that at the target water content, the recreated mine waste will be flowable, as you see in that little diagram on the lower right. Okay, so that's the issue with storage of these waste along headwaters of Arkansas River. Okay, if you're not from the US, that's quite a major river. Okay, now the next proposal I'll talk about, type of mining, which again sounds very good from a superficial standpoint, is what's called in situ leaching. Okay, now the advantage of in situ leaching, well, it doesn't create any mine waste, doesn't create any tailings. Okay, what you're doing here is you're replacing the threat of tailings with the threat of groundwater contamination in a very serious way. Okay, so what's happening here is leaching agents are injected into the subsurface, and these could be either acidic or alkaline solutions. Sulfuric acid as a common leaching agent. And as this flows through the groundwater, it's going to dissolve rare earth elements and other materials. Okay, this leachate is collected either through leachate collecting ditches or through collecting wells. It's processed for extraction of rare earth elements, and then you reintroduce that same leaching solution into the subsurface. Okay, now the problem should be clear that there's many pathways for contamination of groundwater, very problematic ability to capture all of this leaching agent. In any in situ leaching project, a major groundwater cleanup is required at the end of the project. Okay, now problems especially arise when you have a temporary shutdown of a project. Okay, so you have the leaching agent's been introduced in the subsurface, the project has been shut down temporarily. Temporary can ask a long time. Okay, during that temporary period, there's many ways the leaching agent can pass by the collection wells or the collection ditches and can contaminate the downstream groundwater. Okay, so why does anyone do this? The recovery rates for in situ leaching, even when it's done for uranium or copper, are very low. It's only 60 to 70%. So this is done when you have very low grade ores, and it really is not worth the expense of constructing a tailings management facility and other kinds of mining infrastructure. Okay, and now I'll go to the last method, heavy mineral sands extraction. Okay, so this is the Rio Tinto QMM mine. It's on the southeast coast of Madagascar. It produces ilmenite that's used to produce titanium oxide. Titanium oxide is a imported whitening agent, makes things whiter than white. I've seen these candies with these ultra white colors that's made with titanium oxide. I can't believe that's legal, but that's the case. Okay, Zersol also is a product. It's a proprietary blend of zircon, sillimanite, and quartz. It's used for ceramic tiles. And finally, monazite. So this was not originally a monazite mine. Originally, monazite was part of the tailings. Okay, but now the monazite is shipped to China for extraction of rare earth elements. So it really is essentially a monazite mine at the present time. Okay, so the way this works is that mining basins are excavated into the heavy mineral sands. Of course, those basins will fill with groundwater, and then you have a floating dredge on top of the water, and those floating dredges separate the commodities of value from the sands. Okay, so there's going to be continuous flow of groundwater into these mining basins, and of course, that water will then be discharged into downstream waterways. Okay, now these diagrams, the statistics are a little complicated, but these diagrams demonstrate the contamination of downstream rivers and lakes, primarily with uranium, lead, and aluminum. Okay, if these three diagrams, the green is the upstream measurements, black is the downstream measurements. So quite a dramatic increase in uranium, lead, and aluminum as we go from upstream to downstream of the mine. As I mentioned earlier, all of the water needs in this area come from surface water, lakes and rivers. So that's drinking water, cooking water, cleaning water, water for fishing, water for the fish, okay? That's all surface water. Okay, so why is this happening? Okay, the basic idea is that heavy metals extraction lead to acid mine drainage, okay? What's happening in this case is this systematic long-term lowering of the water table in an area where the subsurface is rich in sulfide minerals, okay? And that leads to the oxidation of these subsurface sulfide minerals, resulting in acidity and the release of uranium, lead, and aluminum. And I will leave it at that. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll hear from Bruno next.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for keeping also with the time and for such a concise explanation of all the possible types of minings and impacts. We're gonna move into to Li Tan. I'm gonna introduce her. She's a statistician and social researcher with decades of health, environmental, and social justice campaigning experiences, ranging from grassroots activism to policy advocacy and the multilateral institutional level. She has worked as the Asia Pacific campaign coordinator for the Australian Conservation Foundation and has forged and established extensive links with Indigenous communities, local organizations, and national organizations in the region. And she leads the Aid Watch campaign to stop Linus, which is what she's going to talk about us today. So Li, the floor is yours. You can tell us a bit. I guess you're going to tell us a bit more about what it is to have a rare earth project in your land and what are the implications of that that I guess that has experienced over the years. No, what happens?
Yes, that's right. Now I keep having this issue. Do you know how the top line of icons is blocking my slide? Yeah, I can't start my slide without accessing that. I'll see if I can start it.
Can you move it?
I can't move it. It's the top icon of all. Oh yeah, I can actually. Good,
Yeah.
wonderful. Good.
Excellent. Yeah, yes, happened to me
That's
too, don't
better.
worry.
Yeah, I know. Had this issue before and I forgot how I fixed it. Okay, is that working?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. So just in brief, this is before, the speaker talk about the mining. This is a second stage from the mining. So when we talk about rare earth pollution, there are actually every stage of this mineral processing has pollution problems. So I'm talking about the next stage. So after mining, the minerals usually got concentrated. And this is a case in Malaysia where the concentrated rare earth ore got sent to Malaysia, first by truck to the port of Fremantle, and then by container ship to Malaysia. So, imagine the emission from the transportation. So it's kind of a bit of a false green energy definition when you look at, all the minerals that you need to generate green energy, so-called. I'm not against it. I'm totally for green energy, but it's just the way company did it or has been doing it and still doing it that is problematic. And we do need stronger policy to govern, the definition of green energy or transition energy or whatever you want to call it. So this company, truck the mineral to Malaysia, and then in Malaysia, it get kind of process what we call a secondary beneficiation, where it is subject to very high temperature, the rare earth concentrate, subject to very high temperature with a lot of acid added and other reagent. And all of these are very, very highly corrosive and toxic. And in the process, it leaches out the rare earth, but it also, leach out many of the other toxic heavy metals, the thorium, which is radioactive, and also the uranium. Yeah. And this is what we get in Malaysia after about 13 or 14 years of processing. If you look at it, the plant itself only occupy about 1/5 of the 100 hectares. Now it's about 113, 30 hectares of the land. The rest are all waste. And this is how this company, an Australian company by the name of Lynas Rare Earth, manages its waste or mismanages its waste. If you look at the reddish brown color waste piles, they are the radioactive waste from the water leach purification stream of processing. And in it contains the thorium and the uranium, plus a number of other toxic heavy metals and also minerals, of course. And Lynas simply just pile it up layer by layer, and then covered with black plastic. And the plastic that they use, literally your garbage bag grade plastic. And this is happening in a very low-lying tropical peatland in a rainforest type of environment where you get, daily rainfall ranging from 50 mil to 200 mil. And that's a lot of water that, kind of impact or impounded on this waste. And of course, the leaching comes, or the pollution comes from the overflowing of the waste into the natural environment. And, Linus often claim that its rare earth has very low radioactivity or radioactive radionuclides. But in actual fact, it's the second highest in the world, only after the rare earth deposit in Greenland. And even the Chinese rare earth has much lower thorium and uranium concentration. So, that's for some comparison. Okay, let's see the next one. Why am I not getting to the next slide? I'm having problem going to the next slide. I don't know why. Okay, that's better. So now the Lynas rare earth plant in Malaysia, in the city of Kuantan, and incidentally, that was where I was born. I still have family and relatives living in this city. Before the land was clear for the plant, it was an intact tropical peat mangrove or peatland. For some of you who may know about peatland, they are not like any other ecosystem. They consist of very thick organic matters, and peatland are subject to floods and also peat fire that can burn very deep in the ground because of the methane gas generated in the what do you call that again? The composting process, when the organic matters get slowly decomposed underground. And, so from the geological point of view and hydrological point of view, it is really a very bad idea to set a plant there. But of course, this is Malaysia with very weak environmental regulatory requirement, and Australia and the Lynas rare earth took advantage of that. So, and it is flooded, it floods regularly every year. And these are some of the photos we capture throughout the years of monitoring it. Yeah. And the whitish waste part at the top left-hand corner is they're not considered radioactive, although it's slightly contaminated with thorium and uranium, but it's below 1 becquerel per gram. And the 1 becquerel per gram concentration is the standard that's set by IAEA to require regulation above that. So this is below 1 becquerel per gram, but the one that's reddish brown, that's wrapped in plastic, garbage bag plastic below, they are the radioactive one because they are about 8 or 9 becquerel per gram in concentration. And this is a permanent disposal site that Linus has picked for its radioactive waste. I mean, imagine in an advanced country, a peatland that's waterlogged, that's subject to fire. To pick it as a disposal site would be a no-no with very strong public protest. I will talk about that later. And this is some of the results that we have. I mean, the pollution is not regularly monitored, but from what little that's been done, we actually managed to get some data. And if you look at the level of, pollution that's seen, it is very high. And not only are we talking about toxic heavy metal, we also have thorium and uranium. We've been working with a Japanese professor who took samples from the river mouth. And as you can see here, the concentration of thorium particularly has risen dramatically. Even just after 1 year and then after 3 years of operation. So now we haven't measured anything because in Malaysia there's no means for us to test for radionuclide concentration in the soil. We don't have that sort of facility. So we are counting on international experts to provide their support on a pro bono basis. And this was the environment before, pristine, tropical mangrove, children are playing at the river mouth. They totally ill-informed or not informed at all of the danger in the place in which they're playing today. And also the area is very famous for its seafood, particularly the shellfish, the crab, the mud crab. And yet there isn't a lot of study done to look at the ecological impact, let alone the social impact on local community or the health impact, because only a preliminary environmental impact assessment was done, and the project was carried out in secret without knowledge of the local community, let alone, getting consulted. So this is how it started. I mean, there are some international regulation, but they're not really law. And some of them are mainly guidelines. For example, like the IAEA guidelines, that says that thorium and uranium concentration above 1 becquerel per gram needs to be regulated, but is very loose. And because of that, countries actually exploit that. Particularly countries in the global south with corrupt government or with government that hasn't got a lot of capacity to manage very complex problems like radioactive waste and other type of waste that are hazardous to the health and cancerous, but yet they don't have the capacity or the capabilities or the political will, more often than not, to actually do something about it. And this is what happened in Malaysia. So, despite citizen protests for over 10 years, the government decided to come out with its own standard, totally against scientific evidence, with no justification. The Malaysian government has set the regulatory threshold on norm, which is, as our previous speaker spoke before, so-called naturally occurring radioactive material. I mean, just because they're naturally occurring doesn't mean that they are not hazardous. In fact, thorium and uranium are both sources of ionizing radiation, and there is no safe dose of exposure to ionizing radiation. And cancer is among one of the many problems associated with exposure to ionizing radiation. So what Malaysia did was it actually increased the threshold, which means that it lowered the standard by 100 times that specified by the IAEA. So Malaysia essentially say that linus waste is not radioactive because by its criteria, which is really poorly put together without scientific verification or justification, says that anything that's for non-waste, anything that is below 100 becquerel per gram do not require long-term regulation or control, which is a really bad move. And because of that, all the rare earths in Malaysia are now known as non-radioactive, which is ridiculous, of course. And compared with Australia, there are a lot more requirements for this a similar type of a plant to be established. And also, above all, the waste. Any waste that's contaminated with thorium and uranium, even with much lower than what Linus has produced, require proof of isolation in its final disposal site, that it can be isolated from the environment for at least 1,000 years. The same rule apply to the US regulation, although that's changed under Donald Trump, of course. And so instead, this is what we got, Linus propaganda. That everything is safe, you can still fish, you can still play. Nothing is wrong with the water. And that is a very dangerous type of greenwashing for the local people who are not that well informed because of the political party that is controlling the local community in the immediate site of the plant. And Malaysia has a very bad history of mismanagement of radioactive waste. About 20 years ago, another rare earth plant, which is much, much smaller in scale, had another disastrous consequences back then. Back then, the waste has higher thorium content, and it was left everywhere. And because of that, they were children born with severe disability, many miscarriages, and so on and so forth. And eventually, this company, which was invested by Japan's Mitsubishi, buried the waste in a tomb like the one that's at the bottom left-hand corner. Although in a wet tropical country, according to our German expert, who's a radiation safety expert, his name is Gerhard Schmidt. He came, I took him to visit this site. He said that this site won't last for more than 30 or 40 years in a wet tropical environment. Because of erosion and what have you. So because of this precedent, bad historical experience, and because of the secrecy and and all the other factors, the Linus project has attracted a lot of opposition in Malaysia. It is considered the most far-reaching and biggest environmental campaign in Malaysia. They have the campaign lasted for at least 5 to 6 years. And even today, we are still fighting Linus in court with Friends of the Earth Malaysia, together with the Kuantan residents, taking the government and Linus to court for approving the final radioactive waste dump without going through the proper planning process. And of course, Linus has already built the dump, but we still have to challenge it anyway on moral and principle ground. So the campaign is big. It was very persistent. There were weekly activities and so on and so forth. Even though today people are not as overtly opposing to it because they lost hope that the government will do anything. But you know, the concern remain among citizens. So yeah, for AWatch and also for us in Australia who are concerned with environmental justice, we believe that low emission and green technology, you know, while they are necessary to tackle climate change, but they must be evaluated for their life cycle footprints and also, yeah, good governance and also environmental justice. That's all I have to say today. I'm happy to take question later.
Thank you, Lee. That was really informative, and I'm sure there's several questions that are going to emerge in the Q&A. And but yeah, thanks so much. And we're gonna go quickly to our next speaker, which is Bruno Chareyron. Bruno, if you want to switch on your camera. Bruno is a French engineer in energetic and nuclear physics, has a master's in particle physics, and he was director since 1993. Now he's advisor of the CRIRAD laboratory based in France. CRIRAD stands for Commission for Independent Research and Information about Radiation, which is a French non-governmental organization created in 1986 by French citizens being surprised by the dishonesty of the French government about the contamination from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. So CRIRAD's mission is to make this independent radiation monitoring of the environment and use this data to improve people's understanding of radiation issues. And Bruno has been particularly active in raising awareness about the impacts of uranium mining. And that's why we invited him to speak about this, because there's, well, there was this question in the Q&A about what's the relationship between uranium and rare earths. So I think Bruno is going to be able to explain that to us. And he has conducted studies about the impact of uranium mines in Europe, Africa, Brazil, and he was also active, for example, in Fukushima. And I think that he will be able to explain what is this relationship, why we worried about the radiological impacts of rare earth mining. And I invite you to put up your questions in either in the chat or in the Q&A box if you can find it, and we will collect them, and then we will have a second round for clarifications. You can also make comments. And yeah, Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Claudia, for the slides. So this first slide is just the title of the presentation. We will discuss the problems of the radiological impact of rare earth elements processing. So we can go to the next slide. Okay. The problem is that many different types of other minerals associated with rare earths contain uranium and thorium. In the soil, wherever you live, you have some uranium and thorium. The concentration are usually about a few ppm, parts per million. But in many different types of minerals associated with rare earth elements, you have more uranium and thorium than usually. For example, on this slide, if you look at the red circle, you have the uranium and thorium concentration of zircon, a mineral which is associated with the heavy sands that a company called Base Toliara is planning to extract in the southwestern part of Madagascar. And instead of the few ppm, in this example, it's below 600 ppm. So it's much higher. And we will discuss later the case of monazite, another mineral which contains a lot of rare earth elements, and in which you also have a lot of uranium and thorium. So we can go to the next slide. The problem with uranium and thorium is that we are talking about radioactive substances. All of them, uranium and thorium, are naturally decaying into other radioactive substances. If you look at the first column, it's the decay chain of uranium 238, and you see that uranium is decaying into a special thorium, which is decaying into protactinium, another uranium, another thorium, then radium, and a gas called radon. So altogether, when you have uranium in a mineral or a material, you also have 13 other radioactive substances, including heavy metals like radium, polonium, lead, and also a gas called radon. If you look at the last row, the last column, it's the case of thorium. In fact, thorium 232. Thorium is decaying also into other radioactive substances, including radioactive heavy metals and a radioactive gas called radon. So if we summarize, if you have uranium and thorium in a material, you also have more than 20 different types of radioactive heavy metals plus radioactive gases, a gas called radon. And all those different substances are emitting ionizing radiation called alpha particles, beta particles, gamma radiation, and those ionizing radiation are able to go through the minerals, and some of them are powerful enough to go across the air a few meters away, a few dozen meters away, and enter our body. Also, if you are drinking water which is contaminated by uranium, thorium, and their decay products, you are introducing into your body heavy metals which are emitting radiation. And if you live near an area or where you have a lot of uranium and thorium, you're also exposed to inhaling radon, which is a radioactive gas. What we know is that ionizing radiation, even at very low doses, are increasing the risk of dying of cancer and other kind of different pathologies to the cardiovascular system, to the lungs, to the brain. So even at a very low doses, including natural levels of radiation in the soil, you have an impact on health. So everybody can understand that if you are digging, manipulating rocks, sands, where the concentration in uranium and radium and thorium are higher, you are exposed to more radiation. Another point is that those radioactive substances will be radioactive for very long periods of time. In the case of uranium, the half-life is 4.5 billion years. And in the case of thorium, it's even higher. So if you get those substances out of the soil and begin to manipulate them, you will produce a contamination of the environment for a very long period of time. We can go to next slide. This slide is about a case in France at a city called La Rochelle. It's a harbor in France, where a company called Ronpoulin, then Rhodia, was processing rare earth elements. This company was bringing to France monazite from abroad and processing it. And in 1987, 1988, some colleagues from CRIRAD went there, and on the beach, they monitored a high level of radiation with a radiation monitor, and it was due to the fact that the pipe that was discharging the liquid waste from this plant, the pipe was in fact on the beach, and some of the liquid waste was coming back to the beach with the tide, and my colleagues could collect sort of sediment pellets containing a lot of radioactivity. It was above 500,000 becquerels per kilogram when you look at all the different radioactive elements in association with the thorium decay chain. So at that time, it was really a big scandal, including the fact that in France, like in other countries, we have been told for decades and decades that uranium and thorium are not dangerous, which is wrong, and that we are talking about low doses of radiation. For example, the French ANDRA, Agency for the Management of Radioactive Waste, they use the word very slightly radioactive when they were commenting on the activity of this kind of waste, while 500,000 becquerels per kilogram is in fact not at all very slightly radioactive. It's an amount of radiation which is dangerous for health. So we can go to the next slide. After the years and after CRIRAD publicized this data, the company tried to improve the situation. What they did is first, they asked the provider of the monazite to decontaminate it at the place where it was produced, so that in France could import material containing rare earth elements, but with a lower amount of radiation. The radiation was left at the country where the material was extracted. But still, even today, we have problems of radiation in this area of France. First, because radioactive waste and tailings from the company had been reused for refilling different areas in the city of La Rochelle. And second, even today, when you walk around the facility where some of the waste is still kept, you monitor actually increased level of radiation around the facility, in the street, and even if you go to a playground, you are exposed to the gamma radiation, which is permanently produced by the uranium and thorium bearing waste. So what I want to say is the fact that if you begin to manipulate material which has high levels of uranium and thorium, you're going to have problems for thousands of years and thousands of years. And even in France, a modern country, nobody knows how to cope with such waste, because it's a very long-lived waste. And even today in France, we have no solution to really keep safe this kind of waste for thousands and thousands of years. We can go to a next slide. So very briefly, it's about the situation in China, the big extracting areas of Bayan Obo and Baotou. You see here, we will not go into the details, an official map of radiation around those sites where rare earth elements are extracted. And you see on this map that at some areas, the level of radiation is very high compared to a natural level of radiation. There are some hotspots on some dumping sites with levels of radiation, let's say about 20 times above normal. So the people living in these areas are exposed permanently to radiation, even at home, because if you go to the next slide, you will see examples of homes which have been built. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. The problem is that bricks have been manufactured with the slag, the waste from the mining and milling companies. And in the houses whose walls are made of those bricks, there is more radiation. For example, on the small diagram, you see the amount of radon called PAEC. It's the, let's say, the amount of alpha emission from radon gas. And you see that in the homes where the building have been made with normal bricks, there is much lower amount of radon than the ones which have been made with the waste. So the people in these homes are exposed permanently to the inhalation of a radioactive gas called radon, which is carcinogenic to humans and is the second cause of cancer deaths in the world after tobacco. So this illustrates a big problem that we have with the waste from some rare earth elements, mills or mines, is that for many decades, this kind of waste has been considered as, let's say, without any impact, which is completely wrong. Uranium and thorium have an impact on health because they emit a lot of different types of alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. We can go to the next slide. So here is the case of Madagascar. In the southwestern part of Madagascar, there is a project from a company that was called Base Toliara, a project to extract heavy sands for the production of different types of commodities, including rare earth elements. And CRIRAD gave some training to local communities, and the people could go there on site and make some radiation monitoring. On this picture from Google Earth 2018, you see an old camp where the company was testing the methodology to extract the heavy sands. And the level of radiation that the local people monitored was 10 times above the normal level that was registered in a village in the same kind of area. So you see from this example that even the pilot plants will already produce a contamination of the environment. Even the prospection activities also have an impact, because when you implement drills for knowing what is underground, you bring at the surface contaminated materials. And now the next slide. Just to say that the problem in the case of Madagascar is also that the company is planning to extract the monazite, which is rich, which contains a lot of rare earth elements. But the problem, as we said already, is that this monazite has a lot of uranium and thorium. You have the values here in ppm, 3,000 ppm of uranium, more than 80,000 ppm part per million of thorium. If you convert this into radioactivity, becquerels per kilogram, we are talking about more than, it could be 1 million becquerels per kilogram, which means that if you have a concentrate of this monazite from those heavy sands, you may have 1 million becquerels per kilogram, which means that every second you have 1 million atoms disintegrating and emitting radiation in the environment. So just to say that extracting and concentrating this kind of material will pose problems of exposure to radiation of the workers also that will transport those materials, and to the local people, and for a very long term, because uranium and thorium are have very long half-lives. And now the last slide to show you a picture of a protest by the local communities in the southwestern part of Madagascar. It was in March 2025, but I think that Volah will, from Crad Oil, will give us more explanation about the fact that there is a very severe repression with people being imprisoned in Madagascar at present. So thank you for listening, and we may have some discussion after.
Thank you, Bruno. That was very informative, and it's we can already see the connections between the cases. No, you're presenting what happens in La Rochelle, how they transport the rare earths, and with the issue of radiation. No, where does the radiation stay? And the same happened with the Linus case and the transportation. No, from Malaysia from Australia to Malaysia. And also linking with Stephen Emerman's presentation, the issue of the reuse of waste, no, the fact that even if you reuse it or you, the contamination remains. We're now gonna give the floor to Volah, who is gonna talk about the case in Madagascar, where there's already a rare earth mining project. And there's another one that is looking to open. Volah is the programs director of Crad Oil, which is based there, and they're supporting mining communities affected by large-scale mining projects. So we wanted to give the space for Volah to explain what's also happening there. Volah.
Thank you, Marta, and many thanks to the three panelists. In Madagascar, despite the opposition from the affected communities for more than 10 years, this base Tuliara project, which had been suspended since November 2019, was acquired by the American company Energy Fuels in 2024, and then reopened by the current regime in December 2024. And this despite the various horrifying impacts we have just heard about. In general, these mining companies always say that there's no risk and that everything will be fine, that they now have the technology under control, etc. And the government claims that there is indeed no risk of radioactivity, that these are low doses radiations, and spreading false information about these risks relating to this project is now prohibited. But we have just heard two prominent experts talk about impacts and risk associated with this type of project, as well as Litan's testimony about what is happening in Malaysia. So special thanks to Bruno to have explained what low dose radiation really means. It does not mean no risk. Instead, it enhances risks of different types of cancer. So I wanted to emphasize that despite Malagasy and foreign experts' warnings, these communities' right to consent continue, right to consent and to choose the development model that fit to them continue to be denied. They are criminalized, persecuted, and their attempts to express their opinions are always violently repressed in a really, truly bloody way, actually, as happened in Tuliar in April 2025 and in Fort-Dauphin in 2023 as well, where these community members who are opposing these destructive projects were arrested and imprisoned. simply because they refused, now they refuse to die for energy fuels and all those who make profit from this project because they refuse to die and to be sacrificed. I mean, it's worth recalling that there are plenty rare earth elsewhere, but they prefer to come to countries like ours, as Litan said earlier, supposedly, sorry, for our development, when in reality, it's because elsewhere in their own countries, they are not allowed to do so because of those harmful impacts, because in their countries, their populations are protected from this scourge. And we are told that this is a great opportunity that we must take advantage of. It would create jobs and bring economic benefits. But in fact, for these communities, if I understood what Bruno said, even these so-called jobs have to be questioned. These are currently poisoned jobs, if I might say so. And the so-called economic benefits are certainly not worth sacrificing the lives of these populations. And then it's important to know that there's not only the Base Tuliara project, as you said, Marta, there's also another large-scale mining, rare earth mining project in the north of Madagascar, which has just been acquired by an Australian company as well, Arena Resources. And with the current geopolitical context, there's the big rush to Madagascar. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, came here in April and declared that France is also interested in Madagascar's rare earths. The president of Slovenia visited Madagascar this week, and economic analysts are putting forward the same reason. And we know that many others will follow under the green guise of energy transition. So to conclude with, this rush for strategic minerals such as rare earths is not a boon for the economic development of southern countries, as we are led to believe. It's a real threat not only to ecosystems, but also and mainly to the lives of the affected communities. And despite what these mining companies and their accomplices claim, these risks are not under control yet. And this excuse of energy transition and economic opportunities being used to conceal and violate the local population's human rights with complete impunity. And as I always said, we are already heavily paying for the climate crisis that we didn't cause, which is a huge injustice. And now we are also being forced to accept all the burden, social and environmental ones, for those who are the cause of this climate crisis, for them to now go to the energy transition or for armaments purpose. And that is just unacceptable. I will end there, Marta. Thank you.
Thank you, Volah, and thank you all of you for being here at this point. It's really important to hear what's happening on the ground, like in Madagascar and Malaysia. And here in the chat, we also have Valeria Sepúlveda, that she's joining as a participant today, but they are also she's also part of a struggle in Biobío in the south of Chile. So these are among many projects that are expanding around the world. And actually, if you're involved in one and you would like, and it's not documented in the Environmental Justice Atlas and you would like to make it visible, you can contact us and we can support a process of documentation of the conflict. So thank you, Volah, thank you, Stephen, thank you, Bruno and Lee, for amazing presentations that address an expert perspective from the ground, that many times communities mention all these impacts and they are considered ignorant or infantile. So it's really important, and this is one of the reasons of organizing this webinar, is to bring these other perspectives that would support usual claims made usually by local communities or organizations. So do we have different questions? So I invite you also, Bruno, Lee, Volah, and Stephen, to check the questions that were made. Some were answered by Lee in the questions and answers section, but Marta, she has also collected some. So maybe it's a
Yeah.
bit late. Thank you for still being with us. Maybe we can take 10 minutes to address some of these questions and expand some of the conversations.
Yeah, maybe I collect the questions and then I'll give space for the for Lee and Bruno and Stephen to answer them, and then we close. Yeah, I also wanted to raise that there's been the publication of the strategic projects by the EU, the ones that are outside the EU. And we have 2 rare earths projects in South Africa, Malawi, and 1 graphite project in Madagascar. So yeah, we also, if you know people that are also impacted by this there, we also welcome you to either, contact Mariana to join the case in the Atlas, but also this is kind of creating a network, a network of support also with groups that have similar situations and confront this specific case, of rare earths that has this link with radiation. The questions that were raised were some were about technical issues, about not recycle, and what are the technologies that can help improve this extraction. And the other one was about regulations and how come that Lee already responded a bit, but I wonder if the others have also insights on this. What are the regulations against? It can be international regulations, but also national regulations that to regulate this industry. And what was there? There was also another questions about allanite, which is a primary rare earth element, and if you know specifically about this before entering the tank leaching or another process. And yeah, there was also specific question to Lee about the case in Malaysia. What are you demanding to the company and the government, and why and how this pit land was chosen for the deposit, and what infrastructures were necessary for it?
Do you
So
want me to answer now?
yes, go for it,
later?
Lee, and then we move on to the others. Thank
Okay,
you, Lee.
sure. Yep. Now, in terms of our demand, when Linus first sought to get operating license from the Malaysian government, it has given a legal undertaking to remove its radioactive waste if there is no suitable site in Malaysia to dispose of this waste. And we, continue to insist that the site that they've chosen is highly unsuitable. And we've got various expert reports and analysis from Australia, from Germany, and also from Malaysia to explain why it is not suitable. But unfortunately, the Malaysian government, under geopolitical pressure, as some of you may know, America is because of the trade war with China, is trying to look for alternative sources or supplies of rare earth. And so Lynas, being the kind of biggest non-Chinese producer, become a darling in the eyes of Pentagon and also Japan, for its industry, because all of these countries, both Japan and US, has kind of conflicting relationship with China. So Malaysia became the scapegoat to accept a very, very raw deal. But we are still insisting that the site is not suitable and that Linus must remove the radioactive waste. Okay, in terms of infrastructure, yep, you need a lot of water and also very lax environmental regulation and also, disregard human rights. So if a government has that sort of track record, it becomes very attractive to polluters like Linus. Yeah, well, the Kuantan was chosen because it's like 3 kilometers from the port. So transportation into plant from the port is, minimal. But it doesn't matter that it is a peat swamp, because Malaysia doesn't take care of them. So Linus could do anything they like, as they have done. So yeah, by right, it should be in a very isolated area with no human settlements around it. Like in, the semi-arid zone in Australia would be ideal for that kind of processing with tighter regulation and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, it's not the case. I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. There's also Bruno. I think there's also this question that I think Lee was answering in the Q&A. It says U238 why are rare earth elements deposits associated with uranium? So I'm wondering if the isotope mix is different than uranium deposits, and there's therefore different decay processes. And then there's also the one of international policies. I don't know if you can join together these questions.
I think that all questions have received written answers in the Q&A chat, I think, no?
Yeah, no, I just wonder, since we're recording this, maybe everybody can also hear the response. Or we
Maybe
stop now.
maybe I would like to highlight something that Lee mentioned, is this regulation regression that took place in Malaysia, because many times there's this discussion about regulations, and what has been seen there is that there's this decrease in the what's asked, no, to fit actually these emissions that are measured. So this is something that's also been discussed in other contexts, no? How the current pressure to extract and that creates many impacts is also now being in tension with this process of regulatory regression. Just to make a point that I think is very important and taking place not only in Malaysia, and has been discussed. Maybe, as Bruno was saying, the answer, but I don't know, Bruno and Stephen, maybe you want to do a final comment and highlight a certain aspect that you think is important also from the comments and the questions and answers in the chat. Maybe Stephen, do you want, because you made a very, very good contribution showing broad impacts of mining related with leaching and what it means to mine, no? Not only rare earth, but also other materials that I think it's also relevant in different contexts. Do you want to make a final comment?
Oh, okay. Okay, I can make a final comment. There is just so much information going on here. It's been a challenge to listen to the presentations and try to answer questions at the same time. Okay, but anyone can keep in mind, you're certainly free to ask me questions privately or later on, or however you want to. I think there's been so many questions about geology. I think I just want to kind of emphasize one point, okay? Questions about what is this whole association of uranium and rare earth elements? Why are we talking about the two together, okay? There's basically two reasons. The first is that the essential reason is that the geochemistry of uranium and the rare earth elements are very similar. So they tend to follow similar geochemical pathways, okay? So why you have minerals like monazite, potentially allanite, okay? It's there's a certain place in the crystal structure for uranium, and because rare earth elements have about the same size, they can occupy those same crystal sites. So they tend to occur together, okay? But also something else to kind of keep in mind somewhat for the future, okay? These uranium and rare earth elements are also what's called incompatible elements, meaning when a magma chamber is crystallizing, the uranium and the rare earth elements don't want to go into the crystals. They tend to stay in the magma, okay? So that remaining magma that doesn't crystallize, it turns into kind of a garbage can for all the elements that are called incompatible, okay? When this mixture of magma, this residual magma, bursts out of the magma chamber and crystallizes very suddenly, it's called pegmatite, okay? Now, you might have heard about pegmatite in a sense in connection with lithium. If you haven't heard about it, you're going to be hearing about it, okay? Because that's become a major new source of lithium, is pegmatite. For example, Duade mine in Spain, strategic industrial project. It's going to extract lithium from pegmatite. Okay, well, lithium is also an incompatible element, which is why it tends to occur in pegmatite. Keep in mind this possibility. You could also have uranium and rare earth elements in these pegmatites, and that's going to require very extensive testing. Okay, sorry, that was a whole bunch of geology very quickly. Okay, but something to keep in mind in terms of current proposed and mining projects coming online. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Stephen. This is really interesting. If you want to share like specific like reports in the chat where people can expand this this specific point, I think there would be interested participants to hear that would like to hear more about it. So maybe Bruno, do you want to make a final comment, thinking about the full conversation?
What I would like to say is that, in fact, it's very easy to monitor radiation, even with a very cheap Geiger-Müller counter. So communities can monitor the ambient radiation easily if they wish. They cannot monitor the amount of uranium, radium, polonium in the soil because you require a specific equipment. But if you just want to check, is this rock radioactive, yes or no? Is this soil radioactive, yes or no? Everybody can do that. And in very, in a lot of cases, in France, in Niger, abroad, simple people using radiation monitors can do a lot to show the fact that there is a problem. Then you require, let's say, experts to take samples, to analyze samples in a lab, to do a more scientific work. But what I want to say is just that the people can do some jobs themselves if they want. And I'm happy that in the case of the southwestern part of Madagascar, some people could begin this work with the help of CRAD-OI and the scientific support of CRIRAD.
Thank you, Bruno. CRIRAD have been doing this with other communities around the world. So actually you can visit CRIRAD website and find more information. Lee, it's really late for Lee. She's in Australia. It's past midnight, so she must be really tired. So do you want to say something and go to sleep, which I guess is what you're
Thank you.
thinking?
Yeah, and I have to get up early tomorrow as well. Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you so much for having me again today. I think we should talk about regulation issues in future webinars and also health. There's a lot that we don't know yet, particularly research on health. Impact from rare earth or its pollutants. It's very, there's not many, but we need to talk about it. They are sufficient for us to discuss that. Basically, if you can, don't let any rare earth company come into your country unless you have a very powerful government that will protect the people's health and environment. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble. That's all I can say. Once they're there, they will do the damage. Like the case of Malaysia, we spent over 10 years trying to fight it. But what we see is the waste melting every year. And now Linus is actually getting rare earth deposits from Malaysia, which may have higher level of radioactive materials or other toxic materials. We don't know. And there's no requirement for them to do EIA. So yeah, it is really a disaster in the making for a very small country in a wet tropic. So yeah, if your country is one of them, just don't let them in. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Thank you, Lee, and you have a strong case to say so. Thank you so much. Maybe Volah, do you want to make a final comment and we can close the session?
Well, I totally agree with Lee about the regulations. Still, we need to see how that will be applied in corrupt governments. But I'm very happy to have had Bruno and Stephen here, because I think it's very important to also have scientists working with us. To highlight those impacts and in terms of mobilizations against these destructive projects, on how to handle them, on what affected communities should do in front of this, as I said, the rush for these critical minerals, as they usually lack of knowledge, and this is largely used by mining companies. They say that they now have new technologies, in situ leaching, heap leaching, and many other things that maybe scientists, experts could help in analysis and advocacy actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Volah. So Claudia, do you want to say something? I see Claudia's hand up. So join Claudia if you want. So we would like to thank you a lot for joining this session. That was a bit longer than we initially planned, but there were, I think, very rich presentations with experiences from the ground addressing geological challenges, environmental challenges related to water pollution and water demand, and short and long-term impacts related with those different wastes and the impacts of mining. And specifically, we were able to address the radiological risks related with rare earth that are usually not well addressed in the public sphere. So we hope this seminar can contribute to open a conversation about the challenges of expanding the expansion of mining frontiers around the world to extract these, but as also other materials, because the rare earths are among other materials that are also expanding in Madagascar specifically, and around the world, including consuming countries, now with the strategic projects in Europe, but also in the US and Canada, as it's also mentioned by other participants in the chat. So thank you so much. And on behalf of all the organizers, which are many organizations and activists and researchers, that we hope we can share soon new webinars where we can continue this conversation. Again, Stephen, Bruno, Lee, and Volah, thank you very much for joining us today. And Marta, also for being part of the coordination, and Claudia, and we hope to see you soon. And you can contact us if you want more information, or please visit the EJ Atlas feature map on rare earths if you want to also read more about all of this. Thank you very much.
And we thank the interpreters too. Thank you for your efforts.
Exactly. Yes, Marta, thank you for reminding. It has been a long webinar, and we know it's exhausting to translate. So thank you very much for all the interpreters. Thank you, Marta, for mentioning it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.